Who here has changed majors, changed jobs, moved to a new city, new country? Who here has broken up with someone? If you raise your hand, you know how it feels to start again. It's scary shit. In the last 5 years, I've started 3 businesses. I've had 2 career changes and 1 ex-boyfriend. Needless to say, I've become reluctantly adept at starting over. And although the hard work of starting over never really gets easier, the decision on whether or not to do so does. What I found is that the reluctance for most folks to begin again stems in 3 key fears. The fear of failure, the fear of what others will think, and the fear of the unknown. Those are big fears. And I acknowledge that. They're human fears. But what we often forget is that what else is human is courage, bravery. And I don't want to sound too much like a hippie yoga teacher right now, but we can choose where we put our energy. So let's break it down. Failure. Take it in. No one wants to be a failure. I know, I am a reformed or recovering perfectionist, and sometimes I slip up, so I guess I'm not perfect at that either. But I've been that way since I was a really young age. When I was 7, someone somewhere decided that I was gifted and then decided to tell me, which as a 7-year-old doesn't mean anything except a lot of pressure. I received a lot of pressure from my parents and my teachers, but more importantly, I received a lot of pressure from myself. I remember one time, it was a book report, and I couldn't just write a book report. I spent a whole week holed up in my room building this clay diorama replica of this fantasy land where the book was in, because I wanted my book report to be the best. And that was the theme of my life. I wanted to be the smartest, the most creative, the most outstanding, the most accomplished. And the thing is, when you fall from up here, you fall hard, and it hurts. So what's the remedy? Well, you start to get really good at failing. You just practice it. You weave it into your routine. And as an entrepreneur, you get really comfortable with it. Rejection, failing, you send out a bunch of press releases, nobody cares about your story. You hold an event, nobody shows up. Though that might not just be an entrepreneur thing, I'm sure some of us have experienced that before as well. And it's not just for entrepreneurs. Even if you are not in this self-employed world, you can also practice failing. You can take a dance class, even though you have 2 left feet. You can try speaking a foreign language in a foreign country. Little failures, low risk, low stakes. And we start to invite failure in. We start to develop a hunger for it. And when we do, something really brilliant and really beautiful happens. We begin to disconnect failure from its companion, shame. And when shame is no longer part of the equation, when it's no longer a factor in our decision making, we are free to make those big decisions. The decision to leave a partner, to leave a job, to leave a major, to leave a country. So you might be saying, okay, failure, cool, I can handle it, I'm not afraid. Well, what about what other people will think? We live in this world where we have the omnipresent gaze of social media. And for many of us, there are hundreds or thousands, or if we're lucky, hundreds of thousands of people who will like and comment and see and essentially judge our lives. At least that's how it feels, right? I remember a pivotal moment where my relationship with what others will think began to shift. Let me paint a picture for you. It was July 2016. It was hot. This was before forest fire season was really a thing. And Justin Bieber's Sorry was the song of the summer. So there we are, there I am, just sobbing on my kitchen floor. And I was sobbing because I was 2 years into trying to make my first business happen, the social yoga. And I had started that with no funding, no investment, on a postgraduate income. I was trying to make it work. I was trying to get it to take off, and I was trying to make money. And at the same time, I was really pulled and drawn in another direction, where I wanted to open a meditation studio with 2 other folks that I had met. And in between all of that, I was burnt out. I was exhausted. I felt trapped. I thought to myself, all I want to do right now is quit. But that's not what entrepreneurs do. Entrepreneurs don't quit. They don't leave when the going gets rough. That's the narrative that we're told. And so I thought to myself, what will other people think? What will they say? They knew me as a social yoga. They knew the social yoga as me. And if I'm not that anymore, who am I? I didn't figure it out then, and I probably wouldn't have figured it out for another few months afterwards, but that moment was a catalyst for change. And it changed my perspective because now I realize 2 things. 1, no one really cares what anybody else is doing. We're all kind of too self-absorbed or self-conscious to really think about anybody else. And 2, my work is not my identity. No one thing is my identity. If I run, doesn't mean I have to aspire to be a marathon runner. Doesn't even mean I have to call myself a runner. I could just be a person who runs. We live in this world where we have become so good at wrapping ourselves up in these beautiful packages, 1-page resumes, 30-second pitches, 140-character bios. We've become so good at presenting ourselves in ways that we are easily digestible, or so we are easily digestible. And there's nothing wrong with that. Truly, there isn't. But the danger lies in when we start to leave other parts of ourselves out because they don't fit into this mold that we're trying to squeeze into. Our lives are not meant for other people to understand. They're meant for us to live, messiness, inconsistencies, and all. So here I am saying, I don't care what other people think. But to be honest, for many years, there were 2 people in my life whose opinion of me mattered so much. And these 2 people are my parents. 6 years ago, when I graduated university, I told my parents, I'm not going to try and find a job. And that conversation, or the lead up to that conversation, was terrifying. And for you to understand why I was so scared, you need to know who my parents are. They're immigrants. They're refugees, actually, from the Vietnam War. That's my mother at her citizenship test, pregnant with my sister. That's my dad in Vietnam when he was a child, and that's them one of their first Christmases here. So when my parents were kids, they had a pretty idyllic, normal childhood. They went to school, they had friends, they played sports. But at the age of 18, they were plucked from that normalcy and into a life of uncertainty, of instability. They don't talk about it very much, but I do hear about it from my aunts and uncles. Stories, crazy stories about relatives who were imprisoned because they tried to escape. Stories about walking past piles of burning money because that money became useless when the South lost the war. Stories about my grandparents leaving their children and their grandchildren in the hands of strangers, hoping that this train, this boat, this plane will lead them to safety. So with that upbringing, my parents had this deep-seated need for stability, for security. And that's all they told my sister and I growing up. Stable life, success. Stable life, happiness. What is a stable life? Well, it's a stable job, preferably as an accountant, a lawyer, or a doctor. And stable partner, stable house, everything. And that meant success. That meant happiness. That meant that we had made it. You could say that this fear of instability was my inheritance. And so telling my parents, hey, I'm gonna try this self-employed thing, was like slapping them in the face. But what I didn't realize when I was preparing for that conversation is that I have another inheritance: resilience. Just like my parents hopped on a boat and sailed literally uncharted waters, here I am navigating the uncharted territory of what it means to be self-employed, to be a freelancer and an entrepreneur and have these many interests. I know it's not the same. There's no pirates where I am, but the consequences are very similar. Will I eat? Will I make money? Will I make a living? So I was terrified going into the conversation with my parents. And in having the conversation, I was surprised. Because while they didn't understand why I was doing what I was doing, they had this confidence in me that I didn't really even have in myself. They knew that whatever came my way, I would figure it out. Just like whatever came their way, they figured it out. Because I am their daughter. This resilience is not just limited to me or my family or to the families of immigrants or the families of entrepreneurs. No. This resilience is woven into the thread of the human species because we've needed it in the past to survive, and we will need it in the future as well. There's this really incredible quote in the book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, and it goes like this. To keep up with the world of 2050, we will need to do more than merely invent new ideas and products, but above all else, reinvent ourselves again and again. So if you were one of those folks who raised your hand when I asked about changing jobs, changing majors, changing relationships, changing cities, changing countries, no matter how big or small those reinventions felt, know that you too possess the bravery to begin again. Thank you.